The office had that familiar hum of productivity. Keyboards clacking, phones ringing softly, the occasional murmur of colleagues discussing deadlines. I sat at my desk, sorting through the morning's emails, when I first noticed them. Two women from the office whose presence seemed to bend the space around them in a way I hadn't expected. The first, Sarah, was striking in her quiet, composed way. Around 42, she carried herself with a grace that suggested years of experience. Yet there was a softness in her expression that hinted at a gentle vulnerability beneath her confident exterior. Her hair fell neatly around her shoulders, catching the morning light as she leaned over the printer, her hand brushing mine as she adjusted a stack of documents. The touch was brief, almost accidental, but it sent a quiet warmth coursing through me, subtle, unassuming, but unforgettable. The second, Nadia, had a playful energy that contrasted with Sarah's calmness. About 40, she moved with a lively rhythm, always seeming to have one step ahead in thought and movement. That morning, she passed by my desk, her arm lightly grazing mine as she reached for a folder. The contact was fleeting, yet the sensation lingered, a delicate, teasing reminder that presence could be electric even without words. I found myself replaying these moments in my mind, questioning whether I was imagining significance where there was none. After all, the office was small. Brushes of contact happened naturally in close quarters. Yet there was something in the way they moved, the timing of their touches, the fleeting warmth that seemed almost intentional. My eyes followed Sarah as she walked to her office, the subtle sway of her steps accompanied by a quiet confidence that was difficult to ignore. Meanwhile, Nadia lingered near my desk, leaning slightly as she joked with another colleague, her laughter carrying softly, almost directly into my awareness. I realized then how magnetic these moments could be. Not dramatic, not obvious, but enough to make the mundane office world feel charged with potential. Even in the routine of filing papers or responding to emails, these small gestures began to shift my perception of the day. The hum of the office seemed softer somehow, the light warmer, as though their presence had subtly painted the environment with color I hadn't noticed before. My mind alternated between focus and distraction, trying to maintain professional composure while feeling a quiet, fluttering anticipation that I couldn't quite name. By mid-morning, I was acutely aware of the way they moved through the space. The gentle brushing of hands as documents were shared, the accidental shoulder touches while passing in narrow hallways, the way their voices seemed to linger just a moment longer when they spoke to me. I wasn't sure if they were aware of the effect they had, or if it was merely my own perception heightened by curiosity and admiration. Whatever the explanation, I knew one thing. The day had begun like any other, yet I felt a subtle, undeniable shift. The office, normally a predictable, ordinary space, had become alive with possibility. And in the quiet, accidental sparks of connection, a story was beginning to unfold. One that I felt certain would carry me through days of quiet anticipation, fleeting touches, and the slow, irresistible pull of something unspoken. The week passed in its usual rhythm, but the office felt different now. Each glance, each casual brush of contact seemed heightened, like the air itself carried an unspoken tension. I tried to focus on my tasks, yet it was impossible not to notice Sarah and Nadia moving around me. Deliberate or accidental, I wasn't sure, leaving little sparks in their wake. It was during one of our routine team meetings that the subtle dance of proximity became impossible to ignore. Sarah chose the seat next to mine, a quiet smile on her lips, her presence radiating a composed warmth. The faint scent of her perfume reached me as she adjusted her papers, and for a fleeting moment, her hand brushed against mine. It was almost imperceptible, yet it made my chest tighten in a way that was impossible to ignore. Meanwhile, Nadia circled around the room, passing behind us to hand out documents. Her arm lightly grazed my shoulder as she leaned over, just for a moment, but enough for me to feel the lingering warmth. I swallowed hard, My mind caught between the desire to remain composed and the realization that these touches, so casual to them, left me quietly affected. I tried to focus on the meeting, listening to discussions about deadlines and strategy, but the subtle energy of their closeness distracted me. Each glance from Sarah carried a quiet intensity, a pause in her expression as if she knew I noticed her. Nadia, on the other hand, offered playful, teasing smiles when our eyes met across the table, as though silently testing boundaries I hadn't even realized existed. The tension was almost tangible, a delicate thread connecting us that neither spoke of. I found myself hyper-aware of every movement, the gentle brushing of their arms against mine, the warmth that lingered after contact, the subtle shifts in their posture when they leaned closer. I realized with a strange clarity that attraction didn't always need words. It could exist in glances, in proximity, in the quiet moments that seemed to stretch longer than they should. After the meeting, I lingered by my desk, still feeling the echoes of their closeness. Sarah walked past, her shoulder brushing mine ever so slightly as she carried a stack of files, and I felt a shiver run down my spine. Nadia stopped briefly, adjusting the printer settings near me, her hand brushing mine as she handed over a document. Each touch was fleeting, but the warmth it left behind lingered in a way that made me acutely aware of my own pulse. I couldn't help but replay these moments in my mind, wondering if they were intentional or simply accidents of proximity. But the truth was undeniable. My awareness of them had grown into something more than casual observation. There was a pull, subtle but persistent, a quiet fascination that made even the simplest office interactions feel charged with potential. By the end of the day, I understood something that I hadn't allowed myself to admit before. The office, once just a place of routine, had become a stage for quiet, unspoken connection. And in the way their hands brushed, their shoulders lingered, and their eyes found mine for just a heartbeat longer than necessary, I felt the slow, inevitable pull of something deeper. A tension neither spoken of nor acted upon, yet impossible to ignore. Days slipped by, each one blending into the next, yet the office had taken on a different rhythm for me. The ordinary tasks, typing emails, organizing files, coordinating schedules, now carried an undertone of anticipation. It wasn't that anything dramatic had happened, but the presence of Sarah and Nadia had begun to color even the most mundane moments with a quiet electricity I couldn't ignore. It started with small interactions, seemingly accidental, yet laden with a warmth that lingered in my chest. Sarah approached my desk one afternoon, carrying a stack of reports, her hand brushing lightly against mine as she set them down. The touch was so casual, so fleeting, yet the soft pressure of her fingers left a ripple of warmth that spread through me. I noticed the gentle curve of her smile as she leaned slightly to straighten a page, the faint brush of her hair against my shoulder, and I felt a curious mixture of comfort and longing. Nadia, ever lively and teasing, had a habit of finding reasons to linger nearby. She would lean over my shoulder to point at a spreadsheet, her fingers barely grazing mine, or hand me a folder with a playful tilt of her head, letting her arm brush softly against mine. Each movement was so subtle, so natural, that it could easily be dismissed, but I felt them with an intensity that surprised me. It wasn't just the physical contact, it was the awareness of being noticed, of being considered in these small gestures that made my chest tighten with quiet excitement. I began to notice personal details I had overlooked before. Sarah had a soft laugh, the kind that seemed to bloom unexpectedly, warming the space around her. Her eyes would flicker toward mine in moments of shared amusement, and though she didn't speak of it, I could feel an unspoken acknowledgement passing between us. Nadia, in contrast, had an easy charm, a playful glint in her eyes, the way she would tilt her head or brush a stray hair from her face, making ordinary interactions feel intimate without ever crossing a line. These encounters, brief and unassuming as they were, began to build a quiet rhythm of connection. Every touch, every accidental brush of hands, every shared glance became a note in a melody I was only just beginning to hear. I found myself anticipating these small moments. The warmth of their presence, the subtle pressure of their fingers against mine, the way their proximity seemed to draw a soft current of energy through the air. Even in passing, their gestures lingered in my mind. I would replay a shared laugh, a brief touch of a hand, or the faint brush of an arm, marveling at how these simple, almost accidental interactions could stir such quiet longing. It was a reminder that intimacy didn't always need words, declarations, or overt actions. It could exist in the gentle rhythm of everyday contact, in the warmth that stayed with you long after the moment had passed. By the end of the day, I realized that what had once been ordinary, walking past someone in a hallway, sharing a file, laughing at a small joke, now carried a significance I couldn't ignore. The subtle warmth of their touch, the quiet acknowledgement in their eyes, and the playful intimacy of their gestures had created a world in which every ordinary moment was imbued with a gentle, undeniable connection. And I knew, deep down, that this was only the beginning of something quietly, irresistibly unfolding to be why the middle of the week, the quiet rhythm of the office had begun to feel almost electric. Sarah and Nadia had become a presence I couldn't easily ignore, their subtle touches, lingering glances, and playful interactions weaving a tension I hadn't anticipated. Yet with this attraction came an undercurrent of hesitation, a constant, nagging awareness of boundaries, professionalism, and the social perception of a younger man drawn to women considerably older than him. I found myself analyzing every glance, every casual touch. When Sarah passed behind me, brushing my shoulder with her arm, I felt the warmth linger longer than it should. My chest tightened in response, but immediately a wave of self-consciousness followed. Was I reading too much into it? Could it be mere coincidence, or worse, the imagination of someone becoming overly attentive to harmless gestures? Yet the flutter in my chest was undeniable, persistent, impossible to ignore. Nadia complicated matters even more. Her playful energy, the way her eyes twinkled when she leaned slightly closer, the soft pressure of her hand against mine while handing over a folder. It all left me caught between fascination and restraint. She seemed so aware of her effect, yet never crossing into anything overt. Each interaction left me quietly captivated, even as I reminded myself to maintain professionalism. It wasn't just the physical proximity that tugged at me. It was the emotional resonance of their presence. I began noticing subtleties I hadn't before. Sarah's quiet attentiveness during conversations, the way she seemed to linger in moments of shared humor, the softness in her expressions when she spoke about things she cared about. Nadia, with her easy laughter and teasing glances, seemed to intentionally bridge the space between casual interaction and something more intimate, a playful dance of connection that kept me acutely aware of every movement, every nuance. The tension within me grew as I wrestled with conflicting emotions. Desire and admiration mingled with caution and restraint. I appreciated the warmth, the charm, the human closeness of these moments, but I also questioned whether it was appropriate to allow my mind to wander beyond professional boundaries. Every brush of fingers, every fleeting glance, every quiet smile seemed to carry a weight far beyond what should exist in an ordinary office interaction. And yet, in the midst of hesitation, there was a profound pull, a silent acknowledgement that this connection was real, that it mattered to all of us, even if it remained unspoken. I caught them exchanging subtle smiles across the room, noticing the way their eyes lingered on me for a heartbeat longer than necessary, and I wondered if they felt the same quiet, unacknowledged attraction I did. By the end of the day, I was left with a conflicted heart. The office, once a predictable space of routine, had become a landscape of unspoken desires, subtle intimacies, and hesitant curiosity. I knew I had to navigate these emotions carefully, balancing admiration and attraction with respect and restraint. And yet, deep down, I couldn't deny the quiet certainty that something was quietly, irresistibly unfolding, a tension that would continue to build layer by layer, in the days to come. One late afternoon, the office had emptied almost completely, leaving just the three of us amidst the quiet hum of computers and the faint echo of footsteps in the hallway. It was a small task, sorting and organizing reports, yet the empty office created a space for something more than routine work. The air felt different, charged with a subtle anticipation I couldn't ignore. Sarah leaned over my desk to point at a document, her shoulder brushing lightly against mine. The touch was brief, yet the warmth lingered like a soft echo. I noticed her eyes, calm yet piercing, meeting mine for just a fraction longer than necessary. There was no need for words. The moment itself carried a quiet understanding, an acknowledgement of a shared space between us that was increasingly intimate. Nadia, playful as always, joined moments later, carrying a few folders in her arms. She leaned close to place them on my desk, and our hands brushed. It was a fleeting contact, yet the gentle pressure of her fingers sent a ripple through me, a subtle reminder of the tension we had been dancing around for weeks. She laughed softly, teasing about a spreadsheet error, and the sound, warm, melodic teasing, wrapped around the room, leaving an almost tangible trace of closeness in its wake. For the first time, I allowed myself to notice how these touches felt, not just physically but emotionally. Sarah's presence brought a steady, grounding warmth, a quiet reassurance that made me feel seen and understood. Nadia's energy was different, a lively spark that stirred curiosity and excitement, leaving me alert, aware, and quietly exhilarated. Together, their contrasts, one calm, one playful, created a delicate balance that drew me in, a magnetic pull I could neither ignore nor resist. We found ourselves lingering over small tasks, hands brushing as we reached for the same documents, shoulders touching as we leaned across the desk to compare notes. Each movement was casual, yet deliberate in its timing and impact, creating moments of closeness that neither of us needed to explain. The air seemed warmer somehow, the quiet of the office amplifying the intimacy of these interactions. At one point, Sarah adjusted a document in my hands, her fingers grazing mine in a deliberate, careful motion. Nadia, noticing our proximity, laughed softly, a playful glint in her eyes, and leaned in, resting her hand lightly on my shoulder as she pointed to a spreadsheet. The combination of warmth, touch, and attention left me acutely aware of my own heartbeat, a quiet thrill that was both exhilarating and grounding. By the time the work was finished, the emotional tension had reached a gentle peak, unspoken, undeniable, and beautifully human. There were no declarations, no dramatic gestures, only the quiet acknowledgement of connection. Hands brushing, shoulders lingering, smiles shared across documents, and moments of laughter that resonated more deeply than casual conversation ever could. As we packed up and prepared to leave, I realized that these small, unassuming gestures, touches, glances, shared laughter, had woven a delicate tapestry of emotional intimacy. It was subtle, slow-burning, and entirely natural. And in that quiet office, surrounded by the ordinary tools of our work, I felt the extraordinary, the undeniable pull of connection, the thrill of closeness, and the warm promise of what was yet to come. After weeks of quiet tension and fleeting touches, the dynamic between us began to shift. The office remained our shared stage, but it was outside that I felt the intimacy deepen in unexpected, tender ways. One afternoon, Sarah suggested a coffee break at the nearby cafe, and soon Nadia joined us as well. It was casual, professional on the surface, but beneath it, the air between the three of us was charged with unspoken understanding. The cafe was cozy, sunlight spilling softly through the large windows, casting a warm glow over the small table where we sat. Sarah reached across to hand me a cup of coffee, her fingers brushing mine in a fleeting, electric moment. The warmth of her hand lingered longer than necessary, and I felt a quiet, grounding comfort in her presence, the kind of warmth that says, without words, you are seen and you are safe. Nadia, ever playful, nudged my arm gently as she passed me the sugar, her touch light but deliberate. Her energy was different from Sarah's, a lively spark that made my chest lift with excitement. There was a teasing brightness in her eyes, a subtle acknowledgement that she enjoyed the closeness as much as I did. Each gesture, brushing shoulders, passing objects, laughing softly at small jokes, carried more meaning than casual social interaction could ever convey. As we settled into conversation, the dialogue took on an unexpected intimacy. Sarah spoke quietly about a recent personal challenge, her voice steady but tinged with vulnerability. I listened, aware of the subtle warmth in her presence, the gentle way she leaned in slightly, as if trusting me with her words. Nadia chimed in with a comforting, playful remark, lightly resting her hand on my arm to emphasize a point. The touch was casual in appearance, yet it spoke volumes, reassurance, attention, and a shared sense of connection that was quietly electric. I realized in these moments that the attraction wasn't just physical. It was emotional, layered, and deep. Each gesture, each glance, each fleeting touch built an understanding that transcended ordinary friendship. I could feel the pulse of connection in the simplest of acts. A hand brushing mine as I reached for a spoon, a shared laugh that lingered just a heartbeat longer, the subtle warmth of a shoulder pressed gently against mine as we navigated the small table together. Walking back to the office, our shoulders brushed lightly as we walked side by side. Sarah's presence was steady, calming, almost protective, while Nadia's playful energy sparked an undercurrent of excitement that made each step feel significant. I understood, in a quiet, undeniable way, that the three of us were navigating an unspoken truth, a delicate, age-gap connection that was simultaneously thrilling, comforting, and profoundly human. By the end of the afternoon, no words had been said about what we were feeling. There was no need. The warmth of their touch, the subtle brush of hands, the lingering glances, and the shared laughter had communicated everything. These silent confessions, unspoken, understated, yet deeply resonant, allowed me to see the depth of our connection. And as we returned to the familiar walls of the office, I felt the quiet assurance that something rare and meaningful was blossoming, slowly, gently, and entirely on its own terms. The days that followed our quiet coffee break were different. The office seemed smaller yet infinitely richer. Each glance, each brush of hands, and each shared smile carrying layers of meaning I hadn't dared to imagine before. The tension that had hovered unspoken between Sarah, Nadia, and me had softened into something warmer, quieter, and profoundly comforting. It wasn't dramatic or rushed. It was the slow culmination of weeks of small touches, lingering glances, and mutual understanding. One late afternoon, as the office emptied once more, the three of us found ourselves lingering near the lounge area, casually chatting about a project. The conversation was light, but beneath it, there was an unspoken acknowledgement. We all knew the connection had shifted. Sarah leaned slightly closer, her hand brushing mine as she reached for a notebook, the gentle pressure lingering just long enough to make my pulse quicken. Nadia, standing nearby, rested her hand lightly on my shoulder as she pointed to a page, her playful smile meeting mine in a way that was both teasing and tender. For the first time, I allowed myself to fully appreciate the subtle intimacy of these moments. Sarah's presence felt grounding, a quiet reassurance that made me feel seen and valued beyond the superficial. Nadia's playful energy brought a spark of joy and anticipation, a reminder that emotional closeness could coexist with light-hearted delight. Together, their contrasts, calm and lively, steady and spirited, created a delicate balance, a harmony that made ordinary interactions feel extraordinary. We moved to the small seating area, settling into a cozy corner where our bodies could naturally be closer without awkwardness. Sarah brushed a strand of hair from her face, and her hand briefly grazed mine as I reached for a cup of coffee. Nadia leaned in, sharing a laugh over a small joke, her shoulder brushing against mine. It was intimate, yet entirely appropriate, The kind of connection that communicated care, attention, and quiet desire without needing words. In that moment, I realized how deeply these small gestures had built an unspoken language between us. Each touch, glance, and shared laugh had been a thread weaving a tapestry of understanding, warmth, and trust. There was no need for declarations or dramatics. The intimacy was already present in the subtle rhythm of our interactions, in the way our presence complemented one another, in the way time itself seemed to slow when we were together. By the time we left the office, the sense of connection had solidified into something beautiful and enduring. Walking side by side, their arms brushing lightly against mine, I felt a quiet fulfillment, the kind that comes from knowing that relationships don't always need grand gestures to be meaningful. The attraction, respect, and emotional closeness we shared had grown naturally, gently, and entirely on its own terms. As the day ended, I understood that what had started as fleeting brushes of hands and lingering glances had blossomed into a rare, tender connection, a slow-burn intimacy that was warm, respectful, and profoundly human. Sarah's steady calm and Nadia's playful spark had both found a place in my heart, and in turn, I had found a place in theirs. And in that quiet, unspoken understanding, I felt the simple, perfect satisfaction of a story completed, a connection nurtured, cherished, and finally allowed to flourish.